Okay, so my name is Alicia Lewis. I'm a senior here at Southwestern, and I'm majoring in psychology and political science. My advisor for this project is Dr. Crockett from the Department of Psychology, and it's titled Acquiring Identities, Differences in Collective Identity for White versus Non-White Sororities. So first, what is collective identity? For the purposes of this study, we defined it as the sense of connection that members of a group have with one another. And this is often based off of similar backgrounds, personality traits, and interests that the group members share. There are three main components of collective identity. The first is cognitive definitions concerning the ends, means, and field of action. If you try to apply this to Greek organizations specifically, this could be them all having a similar definition as far as what it means to be a member of that organization or how they should try to recruit new members. There is also a network of active relationships, and this could include relationships with people who are in your organization at the same time, but it could also include people from other chapters at other universities, and it could include alumni of your organization who were in that same sorority or fraternity but at a different time. The last component is emotional investment, and this is the presence of emotions when interacting with other members of your group or engaging in group activities. And we often see that there's a high level of emotional investment for those in Greek organizations if they have a high sense of belonging and if they experience a lot of happiness when interacting during sisterhood or brotherhood events or spending quality time with other members. And so all of these components combined can cause group members to have a strong sense of collective identity. But if there is some discrepancy amongst cognitive definitions as far as what it means to be a member, if there's a lack of active relationships, or if members aren't emotionally invested in a group, then this can all result in a weak collective identity. So collective identity is important because within the context of Greek organizations, it leads to greater conformity and greater solidarity. So it makes the group a lot more cohesive. It really creates a sense of community among all the members. But the results can actually be applied in other contexts. If you look at political sociology, it can have positive implications for social movements because participants can have more of a sense of belonging, there's more of a cohesive message, there's more individual participation, and ultimately their collective action is a lot more efficient. And if you look at international relations, collective identity among countries can actually lead to more cooperation. So if you have a set of countries that all have similar goals and interests and histories, then this could actually make it easier for them to cooperate. And if they're ever in conflict, it makes it a lot easier for them to reach compromise. So some of the same results that apply to Greek organizations could also be applied to countries or to social movements or various other contexts. Most of the research on Greek organizations is within the context of those which are predominantly white. Studies have found that there's high social involvement, but there's a low diversity in members' friendships and romantic relationships. There are high levels of community service, but also higher levels of alcohol use. And there does tend to be more networking opportunities for those who are Greek versus those who aren't, because you're better able to network with alumni and with those who are from different chapters. Some of the research for non-white organizations has found that organizations with members who have a shared sense of adversity tend to have a stronger collective identity. And if you look at female students of color, they tend to join culturally specific sororities so that they can meet other people with shared values and diversity and build relationships with people who are similar to them. And Black sororities in particular tend to place a high emphasis on community service and leadership, especially as far as careers, whereas white sororities tend to place more emphasis on romantic relationships and finding a significant other. So this study actually had two parts. The first part was a survey, and the second was a comparative case study. The survey was conducted electronically, and there were 91 participants total, recruited through Amazon Mechanical Turk. Each person was paid about $2 to complete a 7-minute online survey. Most of them were fraternity members, about 49.5%. along with 40.7% being in sororities and 8.8% of people having an unknown affiliation with Greek life, meaning that their answers indicated that they were in a sorority or fraternity, but they didn't necessarily say the name of their organization or which chapter they were from. Data was analyzed with SPSS statistics software, and so I ran correlations to find associations between different variables. Linear regressions were used to test for mediators and moderators, and independent samples t-tests were used to see if certain variables could actually predict the presence of other variables. So the main results indicate that sense of belonging is positively correlated with overall collective identity, and people with weaker collective identity tend to have a lack of what's called racial alignment. So racial alignment is whether your racial makeup aligns with others in your organization. So this could be a white person being in predominantly white sorority, or a Black person being in predominantly Black sorority. If your race does not match up with most of the other members of your organization, and that means that there's a lack of racial alignment, and this is usually predictive of a weaker collective identity score. Postgraduate involvement is correlated with a stronger sense of belonging. So those who tend to stay involved with the organization in some way after they graduate from their university tend to have a stronger sense of belonging within that group. So the second study was actually comparative case study using similar systems. And so I conducted interviews with two women. The aliases they were given were Annie and Aria. They're both Hispanic, both female, and they attend the same small liberal arts college in Central Texas. And you can see that they're both members of sororities, but Annie's sorority is predominantly Hispanic, whereas Aria's is predominantly white. So they do share a lot of commonalities with each other, but the key difference is the kind of Greek organization they decided to join. So when you look at their interviews, you can see that Annie gives some subtle references to race in her answers, whereas Aria gives none. Annie says that she decided to join a sorority because she was looking for people who understood her struggles as a person of color. And she found her organization specifically through another organization that was related to social and cultural identity. And she explained that it was hard for her to find people like her on campus, but through her group, she felt like she had found her place and she was able to connect to people who were similar to her. Aria talks about diversity, but not necessarily in terms of race. She says that people in her group are very similar in terms of hobbies or morals, but she says that the diversity comes in terms of personality differences and interests. And she also brings up geography because members come from various cities and sometimes even different countries. But she says that even though there are a lot of differences within her group, there isn't necessarily any conflict with that, and they're still able to come together as a cohesive unit. Annie also references diversity, but she says that there is one common interest. She mentions that their members have a lot of different majors, interests, and personalities, but one thing that unites all of them is that they're all very passionate for social justice, and so that's something that they can all agree on in spite of the differences that they do have. Both women said that the pandemic made it difficult for the group to stay connected, but they eventually adjusted to it. And they both say their organizations are tight-knit, but their demeanors suggest a little bit of a discrepancy. Annie says that her organization is very tight-knit because there are only less than 10 active members, and so there are only so many people to know. Aria gave a little bit hesitation, but she did say that overall her organization is tight-knit, and she gave examples of them spending time together around campus and around the community while still obeying all of their university's COVID policies and protocols. So the survey and the interview data both suggest that people of color have stronger sense of belonging and stronger collective identity if they're the same race as most other members in their organization. Some limitations is that even if Annie's organization does have more collective identity among members, that could be because of the size as opposed to race. Her organization has less than 10 people, whereas Aria's has over 50. So naturally, it would be a lot easier for Annie to build strong relationships with other members. but the survey data is still consistent with racial alignment impacting collective identity. So even though the case study only had 2 participants, the survey had a lot more people reply to it, and even those results are consistent across the board that race does affect collective identity within the organization. The interviews did contain some traces of socially desirable responding, particularly with Aria. She would sometimes give references to wanting to please me in a way, in the sense that she would say, I don't know if this is what you're looking for. And sometimes she would essentially be over trying to make it seem that she was marginalized and to make it seem like there was a sense of belonging. And so her hesitation with her answer on how tight knit her organization is does kind of confirm the implications of the study, because I didn't find this same nuance with Annie's responses. She didn't hesitate with any of her answers. She was very confident in all of her replies. And so this suggests that there may be more of a sense of collective identity in Annie's organization as opposed to Aria's. There were 2 respondents in the survey who were in Greek organizations that were non-social. One was in a co-ed service fraternity, one in academic honor society. Even though this isn't particularly significant, future studies could look at how these results may apply to different types of organizations. Something notable that Aria said was that bid day was when she felt most connected to her sorority. And this is a large scale celebration that happens right after an organization recruits new members to essentially celebrate all of the new members that they've been able to recruit. But this doesn't happen with non social or non panhellenic organizations, or at least not on the same scale. So this leads me to believe that there could be some misattribution of arousal, meaning that you engage in activity with another person or with a group of people, and it could be something arousing like dancing or hiking or something that would essentially cause your heart rate to go up, but you don't necessarily attribute that feeling to the activity, you attribute it to the person you're with. You see this a lot in couples, but within the context of groups, you may see this if there's a competing outgroup. So if there's a fraternity who's in competition with another fraternity, then they may experience this level of misattribution and think that the excitement they feel is because of the outgroup or because of their organization, where in reality, the motivation is something completely different. So what does this mean? People of color may actually benefit from organizations that racially represent them. This isn't to say that if you are a racial minority in a predominantly white organization that you can't have fulfilling experiences, but being around those who understand your racial struggles can improve your experience because of the importance of similarity. It's a lot easier for groups to have a cohesive identity overall if group members are similar in terms of background or interest. So if a person of color is hoping to join a Greek organization, then they may actually feel like they belong more if other members of that organization are racially similar. Great, and that is the end of my presentation. Now I'm opening it up to questions.
Looks like Jacob has his hand up.
Yes. I don't know if you can see me or hear me, but
I can.
okay. I was wondering if there's any way to like caution or to apply caution in like running a survey or a study in order to deduce if the racial homogeny of some groups causes any racial issues that people go to these organizations seeking to resolve to begin with. So I don't know if it's like a recurring cycle
So are you concerned that studies like this could cause division amongst different types of organizations?
Exactly. Like, I don't know if there's any way to uh, run a study over that.
Well, overall, it's just meant to see how experiences can be different across organizations depending on your racial makeup, but it also isn't to say that because you're a certain race, you shouldn't join a certain type of organization. Because as you can see that in Aria's interviews, she felt very closely affiliated with her organization. Maybe not necessarily as much as Annie, but she indicated that she would not have it any differently and that she's extremely happy where she is. And that's something that we tend to see across the board. In most cases, if people aren't happy in their organization, they don't choose to stay, they choose to leave. But in most cases, people join organizations like this. They enjoy their time, they stay all 4 years, and in many cases, there is postgraduate involvement even. So it's not necessarily that if you aren't a person of color or if you're not a white person, you shouldn't join a predominantly white organization. It's just meant in a way to pay homage to organizations that aren't Panhellenic or that are not as well known as some of the predominantly white organizations, because on occasion groups like that can sort of be brushed off or they may not have as many members as some of the others. So this is just to show that you can still have good experiences in these kinds of groups, even if they're not necessarily as well known or if they don't have as many existing members.
So you would consider these groups a progressive step towards dissolving both racial barriers and uh, like fueling the uh, future harmony of the society that the organizations are a part of.
Potentially, I think that they can be really useful in students of color finding their place, especially if they're struggling to find a group of people who they can really connect with on campus. These groups can be really useful. And also, what you're saying about potentially dissolving issues concerning race relations, I think that this could definitely help because a lot of these organizations can even work together and collaborate and figure out different ways for Greek life to be more inclusive, regardless of whether the student is in a predominantly white or predominantly non-white organization.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more quick question or comment. This was very clearly a great presentation. Lots of great feedback is coming through on the chat, but we have time for one more quick question or comment.
Oh, Dr. Byron put something in the chat. Let's see. Why might a more homogeneous racial makeup of the organization predict community identity? I think it's really because of the shared sense of racial trauma that groups of color can have, because there are experiences that Black students or Hispanic students have that white students don't necessarily share together. So it's the sense of I have this continued adversity, I am prejudiced against, I am discriminated against, but no one fully understands that struggle unless they are someone of the same race. And so it's the sense of you understand what I'm going through, you understand some of the trials I have to experience, but you and I may not necessarily have this connection if we didn't have the same racial makeup.
Wonderful. I think we're going to have to go ahead and scoot on to our next presentation, but let's give a nice round of applause to Alicia. It's a great presentation.